Here's a question for you. Why don't Christians pay attention? Honestly, why does everything we say to them go in one ear and out the other without hitting anything in between? Because I've got a video response today to look at, and yeah, it's not good. It just isn't. Now, I've done a number of responses to video responses in the past, and I'm very happy to do them if, as Justin Derby here did, they actually tell me that they've done it. Thanks, Justin. I really do appreciate that. I've had a lot of them, though, where people will respond, and I don't even know about it for 6 months or more because they never said anything. And by then, it's usually not worth bothering with. So anyhow, this is a response to a video I did on our buddy Frank Turek, and like Frank, Justin doesn't really do a good job. But I'll let you decide for yourself. This is going to be a long one, so away we go.
Where political incorrectness meets Christian apologetics. This is truth, the objective reality.
Because, yeah, that's not completely overblown nonsense or anything. And this is something I see all the time, especially on religious channels, egos writing checks that their beliefs absolutely cannot cash. It is false confidence masking blind faith. So let's see how this translates to the rest of the video.
Hello there, everybody. Several months ago, one of my subscribers here on BitChute asked me to respond to some videos put out by a BitChute channel that he sent me the link to. When I followed the link, it took me to a BitChute channel called Bitchspot.
Hey, it's me!
Bitchspot is an atheist evolutionist channel.
It's a what?
Bitchspot is an atheist evolutionist channel.
Yeah, no it's not. It certainly is an atheist channel, but evolutionist? I don't think I've ever made a video on evolution, and since I'm almost 600 videos in, you'd think I might have gotten to that by now. Now, I do have a rationalist channel, one that relies on reason and knowledge rather than religion and emotion. Granted, evolution is the single best supported field in all of biology, thus you'd have to be crazy to think it isn't real, but, you know, religion and all. This is my first sign that someone here hasn't been paying attention, just asserting things that aren't necessarily so.
That mostly discusses creation versus evolution and Christianity versus atheism topics, with the occasional politics sprinkled in. Bitchspot is kind of like the atheist version of myself. He's a small content creator like me. He talks about a lot of the same topics that I do, which is like creation, evolution, with the occasional news and politics sprinkled in. And he has an aggressive approach in his presentation style, which I do as well. So if I was ever an atheist for whatever reason, I would probably look a lot like and sound a lot like this Bitchspot fellow.
Okay, but the difference between us, and I do admit that I haven't watched a lot of this guy's content, and therefore I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to tell anyone what he's doing, but there's nothing wrong with being aggressive. People's feelings don't matter when it comes to the facts, and people who think that not catering to their precious little fifis makes you mean, yeah, that's just pathetic. So, if we have the same style, cool, glad to hear it. There should be more of us out there. It means I don't have to pull any of my punches, so I'm not going to.
Of course, with all the things that Bitchspot and I have in common, the main difference that makes all the difference is that when it comes to the creation-evolution issue, he is an atheist and evolutionist, and I, of course, am the follower of Jesus and a young Earth creationist.
So, that makes you ignorant. Sorry, that's not really meant to be as much of an insult as it might sound, but all theists are ignorant on some level. I mean, all of us are ignorant of some things, but when it comes to religion and reality, theists aren't doing so hot. They hold their beliefs for purely emotional reasons, and when anything contradicts their emotionally comforting faith, they turn it a blind eye. I have hundreds of videos showing this to be true. It doesn't matter how a belief makes you feel. It only matters if that belief is demonstrably real. And unfortunately for the religious, there simply isn't. But the good news is, ignorance is curable. You just have to decide that the real world means more to you than your emotionally comforting fantasy world. You have to conclude that truth means more than feelings. And Justin, maybe I ought to look into that.
With that being said, we're going to respond to a recent video that Bitchspot put out. This video is titled, Why No Atheist is Mad at God, which is where Bitchspot responds to a Frank Turek video as part of a week where he was responding to only Frank Turek videos.
And I only do that because Frank Turek is so prolific and, let's be honest, absurd in his misconceptions. I end up doing a lot of his material because he's a poster child for irrational thinking and logical fallacies. He's kind of a one-stop shop for religious ignorance, so every once in a while, when I've gathered enough of his silly videos, I'll make an event out of it just to kind of clear him out.
And it is in the first clip of this video where we see exactly the scenario that both Frank Turek and Bitchspot are responding to.
Now, from here on, he responds to clips from my video, and honestly, as I've done in the past when responding to response videos, I don't want to confuse people with Bitchspotception. So what I'm going to do here to differentiate between the way I've done it in the past is I'm going to make my old stuff, the stuff he's responding to, black and white, and then all of my new content that I'm making right now in color. So I hope that's understandable for everyone. I don't want to screw anybody up.
So I have a friend, and I don't want to classify her as an atheist because she does believe in God. She's just so angry at him that she wants to reject him with everything that she has. She's just really upset with the circumstance that she's been given. How do I convince her of God's love and show her that he can be a loving God even though all of these things have happened to her?
So as we can see in the clip we just saw, a girl came up to the microphone at a Q&A session for a Frank Turek presentation and informed Frank Turek that she had this friend who was not necessarily an atheist, but they hated and were mad at God because of the circumstances going on in their life. And she was asking Frank Turek about how to best approach her friend and basically how to interact with her and the arguments that she was making.
Hey, thanks. That was actually a fantastic summary. Good show, Justin.
Now, in response to the scenario that this questioner laid out, Bitchspot said the following about the friend that she was describing.
You can be mad at what people tell you about this imaginary idiot in the sky, that this supposedly loving deity that's supposed to care about you is treating you like crap, but the second that you actually hate God, you're not an atheist. You are a theist because atheists don't believe this God thing is real.
What Bitchspot had to say in this clip is incredible, and he's actually right.
Wow, imagine that. You can't hate something that you don't think is real. You can't hate leprechauns if you don't believe in them. You can hate the idea of leprechauns. You can hate the stories about leprechauns. But you can't actually hate leprechauns because you don't believe they're real.
For years, Christians have been saying that there's no such thing as an atheist, and that when someone who claims to be an atheist is mad with, angry at, or hates God, they're not really an atheist. They're just somebody who's in rebellion against their creator.
Well, lots of Christians base that on verses in Romans and Psalms that say that everyone knows about God. Okay, well, that's what your silly book says, but that doesn't mean that it's real. This is the difference between being rational, basing things on actual evidence, and being irrational, basing things on feelings. Just because you want your big book of multiple choice to be true, that doesn't make it true. Faith proves nothing.
Bitchspot is essentially saying the same thing. He says that if you're genuinely angry at, mad with, or hate God, then you're not really an atheist.
Now, granted, in the video, and I point this out somewhere, I do point out that she says that her friend isn't really an atheist, even though Frank takes that point and runs around with it looking like a fool. Because where I, and apparently Justin here, agree, apparently Frank Turek hasn't got a clue. And let's be honest, what else is new?
It's so amazing how Bitchspot and Christians can come together and agree on something like this.
It's even more amazing how many Christians like Frank are utterly clueless about it, though. Because if you spent any time around the religiously delusional, Psalms 14:1 comes up a lot. And there are psychological reasons for this that I've talked about in the past in other videos, but it is absurdly common.
Well, it's not an intellectual issue with her right now. She's hurting. It's an emotional issue. So what you can do is just love her and pray for her.
Well, more the former than the latter. Talking to yourself about her isn't really going to help solve her problems. But yeah, by all means, try to help, try to comfort, try to work through her problems with her, whatever you can do. What you shouldn't do is try to introduce your fairy tales into the mix. She's got enough problems without your delusions getting in the way. Just be a decent human being.
So according to Bitchspot, if a person is angry at God because of the circumstances of their life, you should not be bringing God, Jesus, the Bible, Christianity into the equation at all. Instead, you should be a decent person.
Yep, because invariably, God isn't to blame because there's no reason to think God exists in the first place. God didn't cause you to lose your job. God didn't make your pet rabbit Fluffy die. God didn't make you break up with your boyfriend. Real-world problems require real-world solutions. Understanding what's actually going on can help you find credible solutions, or at the very least, help you to deal with reality on reality's terms. Belief in imaginary friends only keeps people from handling things in a realistic manner. It is a sham designed to keep people from being rational.
To which I ask, what the hell is a decent person? What do you mean by that, Bitchspot?
It's really not that hard to figure out. Prayer, whether anyone likes it or not, is just a cover when you really don't care enough to get off your ass and actually help someone else. It's a lie for lazy people. If someone's house burns down and people at their church say they're going to pray for them, what does that actually accomplish? Nothing. But if people at the church actually went and they helped them rebuild, if they raised money to recover, if they donated items to replace what had been lost, if they offered a spare bedroom to the affected so that they could have someplace nice to live, that would be being a decent person. Actual help in the real world. Not talking to yourself so that you can feel like you did something, even when you didn't.
You see, if there is no God, then there is no objective moral standard outside of the human mind by which to judge things as good or bad, decent or not.
So what? These are still subjective standards, which is why all of human society, every human society, has been based on them. You can watch dozens of videos that I've done on the absurdity of objective morality. In fact, I've done plenty of Frank Turek videos on this because it's a narrative that he pushes, and none of these things stand up to a moment's critical scrutiny. Objective morality simply doesn't exist. It never has, and it never will. Your feelings mean nothing.
So at that point, morality is completely subjective based on what the individual prefers or what the society/culture at large prefers.
Yes, it does. So what? Well, I don't like that. Well, too bad. I don't care. It doesn't matter. That's the way things actually work. Your feelings don't remotely enter into it.
For example, according to Islam, a decent person and a good Muslim would subjugate people who refuse to convert to Islam. And if they continue to refuse to convert to Islam, you kill them.
Depending on where you live, sure. And according to the Old Testament, slavery is just fine. Taking your disobedient child to the edge of town to be murdered, that's okay. Forcing a woman to marry her rapist, that's a good thing. Now, go ahead and rationalize your way to how those moral views have changed if morality is objective and God told people to do all of that. Go ahead.
According to Islam, a decent person and a good Muslim man would beat his wife if he fears rebellion from her. Not that there's actual evidence of her rebelling against him before he beats her. No. He can beat her if he fears rebellion, meaning if he thinks for any reason whatsoever that she might be rebelling against him in some way, he is free to beat her according to Islam.
And this is why basing your morals on something as irrational as religion is harmful. When you can just make something up and pretend that, well, God said so, things go horribly, horribly wrong. Other than all of the mayhem in the Bible, you've got Christians shooting abortion doctors, you've got Christians denying gay people equal treatment under the law, you've got the Inquisitions, you've got the Crusades, hey, those fun-loving pedophile Catholic priests, and, oh yeah, Hitler, that Christian guy who said that God told him to massacre the Jews. The second you base your morals on religion, you lose the ability to rationally debate the ideas because suddenly they're God's holy writ. Are we seeing a problem here?
Now, Bitchspot may condemn what Islam teaches regarding what I just brought up, but if he does, his condemnation is meaningless, because if his worldview of atheism and evolution is true, then nobody's right and nobody's wrong on moral issues, because there is no objective moral standard by which to judge things as being right or wrong, decent or not.
Like a lot of other theists, you are stuck on this whole objective thing, which is really ridiculous. There may be no objective standard, but there sure are subjective ones, and societies adopt subjective standards as the norm, whether you like it or not. It's how the world demonstrably works, whether you like that idea or not. And this is why the religious are so screwed up, because when it comes to morality, their entire view of morality is simply demonstrably and factually incorrect. It's based on emotions, not intellect. It's what they wish was true, instead of caring what's actually true. And that's not how rational people operate.
So I think at this point you just need to love her, and you need to maybe read the Psalms with her, because some of the Psalms are Psalms where David or a Psalm writer is saying, God, why is this happening to me? Then you can, if you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it talks about us going through difficulty, but how these light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a greater weight of glory that far outweighs them all.
Then you can look at Job, where God and the devil have this contest over Job's misery. Because your God is a dick.
In this clip, we see Bitchspot claim that in the book of Job, God and Satan were having a contest over Job's misery and that God was a dick for doing so. Either Bitchspot has never actually read the Bible in the book of Job and therefore has no clue what he's talking about, or he does know what the book of Job actually says and he's deceiving his audience into thinking that the Bible says one thing when it really doesn't.
Or what I said was absolutely true, and you don't like the idea, so you want to pretend that it's not what it says. This is extremely common among the religious. Embrace the parts that you like, ignore the parts that you don't. Because Job 7:20 doesn't say, "God, why have you made me your target?" Job knows God is doing this to him for no real reason that anyone can identify. Now, I could go do an entire video on just Job, everything from Job 2:2, where God asked Satan where he came from, like, hey, aren't you God? Aren't you supposed to know everything? That's dumb. The whole thing is a contest set up in Job 1:10, where God agrees to play along as Satan destroys everything in Job's life, just to prove that Job has Stockholm Syndrome and will side with his tormentors no matter what happens. I'm sorry, Justin, but your God is a dick. Maybe you ought to find a better God, or maybe you ought to just join reality and get rid of the imaginary friends altogether.
Why don't we actually turn to the book of Job and see what was really going on when God and Satan were having their so-called wager? Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them.
So, sure, I guess daughters don't get birthday parties, because according to the Bible, they're just essentially slaves anyhow.
When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom.
And Job is so delusional that he thinks everyone is just cursing his imaginary friend for no reason whatsoever. Now, yes, this is ancient mythology, but for some bizarre reason, some people think this is still valuable and worthwhile to pay attention to. Okay, whatever. Sure, just go on.
One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?"
Yeah, because, God hasn't got a clue.
Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger."
Which, of course, God later changes his mind on. Boils and all that. So much for consistency.
Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord.
How is that even possible for a deity that is supposedly omnipresent? Everywhere is in the presence of the Lord. Do you understand your own theology?
So as we can see from the passage we just read, at the time that God and Satan met up and had this conversation, Job was not in misery. He was living possibly the best life you could. He was the greatest man in all the East. He had everything going for him as far as material possessions goes. Everything was going good for him, and he loved and revered God. Satan came to God and said, "Yeah, Job loves and reveres you, but the only reason he loves and reveres you is because of all the good things and the good circumstances that you've allowed him to have in his life."
Which is true. And God could have said, "Yep," and been done with it. Instead, he agrees to allow Satan to ruin Job's life just to see what would happen, which is really kind of stupid because God already knows what will happen. Omniscience, This is an entirely pointless exercise, and Job suffered for nothing. It's an experiment in cruelty. I guess where ethics are concerned, God says,
Satan then told God that if Job's life circumstances were to change for the worse and go down the toilet, that Job would curse and reject God.
Which is pointless because Satan, having been chief among God's angels at one point in time, should have known that God was going to win because God already knew the outcome. So how dumb is Satan anyhow? God is a needless sadist, and Satan is an idiot. And you believe in these things. Why?
Satan's claim has some merit because there are people out there in the world who, when things are going good in life, they accept the idea of God and they proclaim to love God and Jesus and the Bible and the church. But as soon as life circumstances start to turn for the worse and goes down the toilet, they curse and reject God. This is the kind of person that Satan was accusing Job of being. Now, my question to Bitchspot is this. How do you test Satan's claim?
If you're God, you don't have to. You already know the answer. You know it with absolute clarity, and it isn't remotely possible that you could be wrong. But of course, the view of God has changed over the centuries and millennia. Back in the early days, God was seen by the ancient Hebrews as somewhat of a warlord. He wasn't perfect, he makes mistakes. That's why if you read the Old Testament, you find verses where God makes errors, God admits he makes errors, and he regrets them. Because at that point in time, none of the omni properties had even been dreamed up, and all of the stories were told from that perspective. But now that things have evolved into including the omni properties, Christians have to rejigger these old tales with their new beliefs about the characteristics of God. Characteristics that have all just been made up and arbitrarily assigned, by the way, to have any hope in hell of any of it making any sense at all. But modern apologists have to explain what the old stories really meant. Not what they said, because what they said makes no sense at all in light of the new beliefs, but what they really meant, so that they can be brought into line with modern faith. But how would you know what they meant? Where did you get that information? Or is it just a bald rationalization, desperately trying to make some sort of sense out of things that make no sense at all? Think about it.
How do you figure out if that was really the kind of person Job was? The answer, of course, is exactly what God did. God knew that Satan was wrong about Job being a person who only loved and revered God because of his good circumstances in life. God knew that Job loved and revered him regardless of life circumstances.
And Satan should have known that God would know, yet God still allowed Satan to torture Job for no good reason, because God is a douchebag. It's a bet that should never have been made in the first place, and you'll notice who it was that made the bet. It was God, not Satan, God. Job 1:12 has God telling Satan to go ruin Job's life. It wasn't Satan's idea, it was God's. That God that already knew what Job would do and came up with the idea anyhow. And you worship this moral monster. What the hell is wrong with you, Justin?
But he wanted to show Satan thoroughly that he was wrong, so he allowed Satan. God didn't cause the life circumstances to go sour on Job. He allowed Satan to do that to Job.
God told Satan to do it. And it isn't like God couldn't have stopped Satan from acting. God wanted him to win a pointless bet that both God and Satan should have known that God couldn't possibly have lost. So they put Job into the middle of this pointless dick-waving contest, and not only Job, but all of his family, all of his goats and his sheep, all of them got needlessly murdered so that God could say, "See, I told you so." What the hell, Justin?
God allowed Satan to turn Job's life circumstances upside down and flush them down the toilet as a test to show that Job was not the person that Satan accused him of being.
And why would God care what Satan thinks? Seriously, why is this God of yours so weak-minded that he cares what his minions think? What's next? Torturing puppies because somebody made God feel insecure?
Now, Bitchspot would probably whine and complain about God allowing Satan to turn Job's life circumstances upside down just so God can show Satan that Job is not the kind of person that Satan accused Job of being. But if he does that, I would really like to hear his explanation of what a legitimate test for Job would be that did not involve turning his life circumstances upside down.
Why does there have to be a test at all? God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God already knows with perfect inerrant accuracy the truth. And Satan knows that God knows this. So the entire situation is absurd in the first place. I mean, God could just impart some of his perfect knowledge to Satan and say, "See, told you so." Or maybe you didn't think about that.
To conclude this video, I would like to point out something that I have observed from Bitchspot as I have watched his videos. You see in this video multiple times, if you go and watch it, that Bitchspot insists over and over, God does not exist. He's a fairy tale. He's just an imaginary character.
Nowhere have I ever said that. Now go ahead, go watch the video. Watch all of my videos. I have never, ever said that God does not exist. I've said that there's no evidence for God's existence, therefore you'd have to be a fool to believe in him. And this goes for everything. Any idea which cannot be objectively supported by verifiable evidence and logical reasoning should not be accepted by rational people, period. The time to believe a proposition is when that proposition is demonstrated to be true, and not a second before. And Justin here apparently can't get that through his head. In fact, he can't see the difference between what I actually say and the straw man he's presenting. Because as far as he's concerned, as far as just about all apologists are concerned, there is no difference. It's a binary proposition. You either believe their gods are real, or you believe their gods are not real. It's faith all the way down. And that's not how it works.
Bitchspot insists multiple times throughout this video that God does not exist, and in just about every video that he puts out regarding religion and the Bible, Bitchspot insists multiple times that God does not exist, and that he's an imaginary character, and that he's just a fairy tale concept.
And based on all the evidence that we have, that's true. Just like all of the other proposed gods out there that Justin here doesn't believe in, who he thinks are fairy tales and imaginary characters. And you might make the case that he's using logic and reason on every god but his own, but he's really not. At least I'm assuming he's not, because no apologist does that I'm aware of. He's saying the rest don't exist, and honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's saying that solely because he thinks his is the right one. His is right, all the rest are wrong, so there. There's never an instant that he's thought about any of this rationally. It feels good to think that he's got the right God, therefore all the rest have to be imaginary because his theology insists that they are. Never mind that every other theist on the planet thinks the same damn thing. The Hindu feels good to believe in Krishna. Therefore, Krishna is real, and all of the other gods from all the other pantheons are not. The Muslim feels good to believe in Allah. Therefore, Allah is real. Nobody else is. The ancient Egyptian felt good believing in Ra. Therefore, Ra was real, and the other gods not so much. It's the same stupidity, just interchangeable deities.
If a person was to upload videos to the internet as often as Bitchspot does, and if they were to insist over and over and over and over again inside each video that they were not crazy, a person from the outside watching those videos would come to the conclusion that that person actually was crazy, because if the person was truly not crazy like they kept insisting, they wouldn't be repeatedly insisting in each and every video they put out that they are not crazy.
Showing that you really haven't watched my videos or paid any attention to what I've said. I guess that's really not surprising, is it? It's a lot easier to insist that people are saying what you want them to be saying than to actually understand the words coming out of their mouths. One requires integrity, and the other one only requires faith. Guess which one is intellectually valid?
The same thing is going on with Bitchspot. He puts out tons of videos, and in just about every video he puts out, Bitchspot repeatedly asserts that God does not exist. God does not exist.
And where have I ever said that? Oh wait, nowhere. Not once. But hey, when you've got a comforting narrative, you might as well run with it. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to make sense. Just assume that your audience won't know any better and make whatever claims you want to make, no matter how false they are. Good job, Justin.
He's just a fairy tale. He's just an imaginary character. Because Bitchspot repeatedly insists in each and every video that he puts out that God does not exist, I have to conclude that God really does exist.
And this, dear listeners, is why the religious are so laughably wrong all the time. They're not paying attention to anything that's going on around them. They have a narrative to push, and everything gets forced into it, whether it's true or not. Because religion, by its very nature, is not honest. It's emotional, not rational.
Because if atheism was true and God really didn't exist, Bitchspot would not be repeatedly insisting in just about every single video he puts out that God does not exist. He would move on to other things.
And I'd be happy to move on to other things the second the religious just go away. Because that's why most atheists even bother to talk about God. Because the God-botherers are so utterly obnoxious in the real world. We don't believe for a second that your imaginary friend exists, but you sure do, and you are causing no end of harm to the world. You don't see atheists strapping on bomb vests and killing the innocent in the name of atheism. That's the religious. You don't see atheists shooting abortion doctors in cold blood. That's the religious. You don't see atheists throwing gay people off of roofs or denying them equal treatment under the law. That's the religious. You don't see atheists pretending that some magic man in the sky will solve all of our problems. That's the religious. You don't see atheists getting down on their knees and acting like talking to ourselves will make things all better. That's you people. What the hell is wrong with you? We're not talking about God because we think God is real. We're doing it because you people won't shut the hell up and stop harming humanity with your asinine bullshit.
Now you have to ask yourself, why does Bitchspot continually insist in every video he puts out that God does not exist, God is an imaginary character, God is just a fairy tale?
I just explained it. It's your fault. Well, not yours personally necessarily, but you're certainly part of the problem. Atheists don't care about gods. They care about crazy people who believe in gods. You people need help.
The reason why Bitchspot does this is because deep down in his heart, he knows that God exists. He knows that he has violated God's laws, and he knows that God is going to hold him accountable for violating his laws.
Wow, you really are delusional, aren't you? This is what I was talking about before. They have a narrative, and they've got to stick to it, no matter how much they have to twist and turn the facts to get them to fit in. This is blatant dishonesty, and I'm sure Justin here isn't even aware of just how dishonest he is. Because, let's be honest, he doesn't care. He has a blind faith to uphold and nothing else matters. Honesty is just a suggestion after all, right?
And so because Bitchspot does not like the concept of a God that holds people responsible for violating God's laws, he rejects God by falsely claiming that God is an immoral, genocidal monster.
No, the Bible does that. Your own fairy tales do that. I've already shown that God was an immoral monster in the Job story, and we can do that throughout the entire Bible. You let God get away with things that would make Hitler look like a piker. And hey, it doesn't matter to you because he's God. God gets an automatic free pass because you have blind faith and an emotional attachment to this silly idea. It's why there are so many Christians, and granted, it's not just Christians, I'll be honest, but so many theists who openly admit that if they were convinced that God wanted them to murder others, they'd do it without a second thought. Or, in most cases, a first thought. And you wonder why we think you're dangerous.
And then, in order to avoid being held accountable for falsely accusing God of being an immoral, genocidal monster on top of all of his other crimes against God, Bitchspot pretends that God does not exist.
Well, here's the thing, Justin. Pretending God doesn't exist doesn't actually make God not exist, if God exists in the first place. It's like saying, well, I don't believe the police are real, so I can go out and commit any crime I want and I'll just get away with it. And that only works until the cops show up. Because beliefs don't matter. No matter how strong they are, only reality does. And reality doesn't show that there are any gods out there at all. You're welcome to present evidence to prove me wrong, but I'm not holding my breath.
And from a strategy perspective, this is brilliant because if it is true that God does not exist, then there is no objective moral standard outside of the human mind. And if both of those things are true, then not only is an atheist not going to be held accountable for their crimes against God, but those crimes themselves don't really exist, so there's nothing to be held accountable for anyway.
True, but that's true of you too. What about your crimes against Krishna? I don't see you worrying about those, and why would you? You don't believe Krishna exists. From my standpoint, from my rational, unemotional standpoint, you shouldn't believe in Krishna for the exact same reasons that you shouldn't believe in God. Zero objectively demonstrable evidence. Your God has none, Krishna has none, and therefore they are equivalently imaginary. Sin doesn't exist unless there is something demonstrable to sin against. You haven't demonstrated your deity. Get to work.
Of course, the problem with this is that God actually does exist.
And you're proof for that. Oh, wait, you have none. That's right. You believe all of this because you've had this idiotic mind poison stuffed into your head, and it makes you feel good to believe it. Therefore, you insist that it's true. Well, guess what? Furries feel really good thinking that they're really anthropomorphic animals born mistakenly in human bodies. They get a strong emotional reaction believing it's true. They're still crazy though, just like you.
And he is going to hold Bitchspot accountable for the crimes he has committed against God, regardless of whether or not Bitchspot wants it.
If God is real, fine, he does. And I have the intellectual integrity to tell your moral monster to his face just how awful he is. Assuming that any of the tales in the Bible are accurate, which is highly debatable anyhow. Because I stand up for my convictions, unlike the spineless religious who believe because of the potential reward and because they're terrified of the potential punishment. That's the difference between you and me. I've got a backbone. You ought to grow one.
Now, as I said in the beginning, I actually like Bitchspot. He's essentially the atheist version of myself, so I actually like the kind of content creator he is, even if his worldview makes him say and do things that, well, aren't good.
No, they're good. They are based in reality, which is something you ought to join once in a while. When it comes to examining the facts, feelings really don't matter. I don't care how your beliefs make you feel. I care if your beliefs are factually true, and unfortunately for you, they cannot be reasonably justified as such. Now, I know that doesn't matter to you, it's all feels over reals nonsense, but some of us actually care. And it's kind of sad that you don't.
But it is my honest hope that one day I will be able to call Bitchspot a brother in the Lord. It is my honest hope that God will open his eyes to the falsehoods that his current worldview teaches, and it is my hope that he will accept what the biblical worldview teaches, and that he will enter into a personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, been there, done that, had the t-shirt. That will only happen again if someone can present objectively verifiable evidence that this God of yours, this specific God of yours, in fact, any God of any kind, really, is actually demonstrably real. And you people aren't even trying, because you don't care. So I wouldn't be holding my breath. Maybe, just maybe, you ought to try a personal relationship with reality. At least it's not delusional.
I would love to be able to call this man my brother one day, just because of how similar we are in terms of our work as content creators.
I really don't think we're all that similar. Now, sure, maybe on some vague level we've got sort of similar personalities, but I am 100% reality-based, 100% intellectually based. I care if what I allow into my head is actually so. And you, well, you don't. That's the difference between most atheists and most theists. We care. You don't. We test our views against the bedrock of reality. You don't. We expect evidence. You don't. We think. You react. We reason. You feel. We really have nothing in common. That said, though, I'd be happy if you join reality one of these days and care if the stuff in your head is true. I'm not holding my breath because, clearly, you just don't care. If it feels good, you'll embrace it. Truth doesn't matter, only comfort does. And so long as that's true, at least from my perspective, you're a lost cause, just like most religious apologists. They are nothing more than examples of a rationality who push a narrative that cannot be verified because it feels good. It's not a club you should be proud to be part of. It actually makes you kind of stupid. But hey, your life, your choice. You think what you want. The rest of us, we're just going to go over there and laugh.
Bum